The Jeffrey Epstein story seems to have become a toe, what you call the theory of everything, right? Or for that matter, conspiracy theory, conspiracy fusion theory. Why? Because it happened at a highly emotionally charged moment in history, and at that time, many people started projecting a lot of other parallel theories onto the man. But of course, this entire story has making of huge scandals, right? And let us actually talk about it, because once again, it seems to be dominating the news cycle. Is not on the mainstream media, at least on the alternative media side. It is dominating, and it is again making many people emotional about the matter. So we are going to take a deep dive, and also we are going to actually cover very important issues or aspects that seem to be missing in the main discourse, right? And I'm doing this just as a kind of favor to everybody who perhaps can use a new pair of eyes to understand what went wrong with their theory. And that could be because many people whom I respect, for example, President Trump, and then Tucker Carlson, the very man who has recently earned my respect by actually, taking a stand on Iran. People like that are also included in the discourse, so one has to actually talk about it. And of course, then Trump administration's office bearers, Pam Bondi, the AG, and others also. So I wanted to actually deconstruct whatever is being said. So we all know what this reported story is so far. Number one, we know Jeffrey Epstein, Jack's story. He was a school teacher, and all of a sudden he becomes this high roller. And many people have conjectured that he was an intelligence agent, or if he was not an intelligence agent, then he was an intelligence asset, right? And of course, he had trucked with many influential people, and there are people who are involved in his rise. For example, Wexner is known for his influence, pro-Israel influence, and of course, then people would actually connect him with Mossad. And then, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell's father was also related to the British intelligence. So people are actually essentially dragging these two intelligence bodies into the matter, right? And then, of course, there was high-profile arrests, but the scandal kept on building, and finally, the man is found dead in his cell. After that, Ghislaine Maxwell was actually tried, and during her trial, there were many revelations. And after that, she's, on one side, appealing on the process and wants a trial to begin once again. And on the other side is Jeffrey Epstein, who has died. Right? So now let us first focus on this question, whether he was that puppet master that everybody keeps on assuming he was, right? And whether he had that kind of compromise on people and the kind of influence he had, and then whatever is his relationship with President Trump. And finally, what we are going to do is we are going to look at why there isn't been those big bang of revelation that everybody was expecting, especially the kind of client list that people kept on expecting, or for that matter, that kind of evidences. So we are going to actually focus on all these matters and more during this discussion, right? The first aspect is, if he was a puppet master, that influential a person, do you think he would have died in this manner, or he would have been apprehended in this manner? Do you think that the system, if it is so acclimatized with such characters, will easily let go of such an important cog in the wheel? Right? I don't think so. Right? That would essentially mean that even if he was an agent, and by the way, if he was an agent of an intelligence agencies, usually people like that are taken care of before it becomes a story. They're just abandoned, they're just thrown away, cast away, and something just happens and people disappear. We don't live in a fairy tale where everything fits at the end, right? And because of that, since this whole story actually broke at a time when everybody was very emotional, 2017, of course, and he was arrested in 19. At that time, this cascading effect was there. There were people very angry with Trump administration, and there were people who had blind faith in the man. So, with that kind of emotional environment, you could easily understand that there would be some kind of spiraling effect of the story. So everybody seems to have considered it as the big fusion conspiracy theory, right? Where everything is through transference, through the projection, everything is tried to neatly fit into one theory. And at the center was Jeffrey Epstein, or somebody who was actually pulling his strings. But number one thing is clear: he wasn't espionage mastermind, or for that matter, the kind of spy master or puppet master, so to speak, that you might think he was. Right? Of course, he must have loads of compromising material on people, but to what end? that becomes an important story. Now, is it possible that he was essentially an asset, a deniable asset, so to speak? If he was a deniable asset, why was he, why was he killed? He could have easily been denied, and people could have moved on with their lives. Of course, there must be influential people on his list or whatever list he had or maintained. But we have seen the travel logs of the so-called Lolita express or flights, and we have seen various other things. So we haven't seen that kind of big bang, revelations in the story. So it becomes difficult for anybody to believe that he was even an asset. So what is the alternative possibility? Douchebags exist around the world, and then these billionaires, especially people with high influence and intelligence connections, also use such people. They set up these independent shops, and just like mafia, and these people operate on their own. And in the end, what happens is that they finally are abolished one way or the other if they become a problem. So here again is the concern that one, why was he arrested? Why did anybody allow it to become a story? Do you think elsewhere there isn't any similar kind of rackets going on? There are no other people who might be doing similar kind of things. We keep on hearing stories. When we were hearing about Epstein, and before it became a story, right? There were murmurs about these issues. There were other stories about other people, and they still continue to this day. Have you seen any revelation in those? So how did it become a story? And then the guy is apprehended, and once he is in prison, he dies, right? Mysterious death. Question number one: if he was an intelligence asset, why was he killed in most obvious way possible? I mean, you could have one day you could have found that somebody called Jeffrey Epstein who did not wake up in his bed and he died, right? Someday you could have heard that there were people, he had a plane crash and he died. You could have heard similar kind of stories. So the question is, why would somebody of that kind be allowed to be arrested, allowed to become such a big story, and then killed in the most obvious way possible? As I was saying, that he could have been killed in his bed. He could have had a plane crash. He would have died in such a way that you wouldn't even have heard about the man's various negative activities. But that did not happen. It was allowed to become a story. Then there's this high-profile arrest, and then he is killed in jail in the sloppiest way possible, because the suicide idea is so obvious. It is just out of a Hollywood movie story, right? Intelligence operations don't function like that. I don't have any brief or any sympathy for Mossad or for that matter MI6. I've been very critical of Mossad's recent policies, particularly the Israeli policies in Gaza and whatever kept on happening later on. And it is all on record, right? In my television shows, in my columns, and repeatedly on social media as well. You can go and mine it as much as you want. But here's the perspective that you seem to be missing. If it is Mossad, why would Mossad do something so sloppy? If you want to know how efficient or effective they are, Conan Bergman's book "Rise and Kill First" is an amazing book. It shows you how sophisticated the operations are. But even if you are not going to listen to stories in books, just look at what has happened in the last few months, right? Or 1 year for that matter. Remember the story of exploding pagers. Then remember the software called Pegasus. And finally, have you seen how they actually took out the head of Hamas in Iran, in one of the safest places where it was possible? So do you think that those people allowed this to become a story, and then all of a sudden scurried to silence the man when they thought that perhaps something eerie is happening or perhaps they're going to be exposed? It doesn't happen like that. If that was the case, if there was any kind of intelligence involvement, then it flows automatically that it was a low level job. High influentials, highly powerful people within the intelligence communities cannot be in on it. Otherwise, it would have never become a story. This is how these things work, right? We don't live in fairy tales. We don't live in a Dan Brown novel where everybody leaves some kind of trail. These things happen very clearly, very cleanly, and you wouldn't even know about the story. So the guy is actually apprehended. He dies in jail. So if there was an intelligence or involvement, it would be low-ranking officials. That means that all this talk about people at high positions getting worried about it, and that's why he was eliminated, can't happen, right? There's this theory that perhaps he had a dead man switch, and that's why they couldn't touch him before. So what happened in jail? Automatically, the dead man switch actually did something, or it became ineffective. It doesn't work like that. Similarly, if Mossad is so efficient, think about MI6, think about CIA, the most powerful intelligence agency in the world, right? That doesn't seem to be the case, and that doesn't seem to be the story. Now, if there were, low-level people who were involved, it flows that people in high and mighty position against whom there was any kind of evidence, they could not be worried about whatever was happening. Either that evidence had already been taken care of, or then there was some kind of assurances that it will not go into public stream, right? Some kind of self destruct or something else that might have happened, right? Now, if that is the story, why is it that it has become such a big one and it keeps finding traction and it is just exploding? There's another possibility, and you have to remember this, that we are living in the age of psyops, where some unfinished building, some unfinished story, or some kind of loose thread is actually identified. Then you magnify it. Then you create atmospherics, and that can play that kind of influence. And I don't mean Russia. There are so many others, right? At low level, you can play with so many things possible. That if the purpose is to create this permanent wedge and create this thorn on the side of the American institutions, that is very effectively covered, right? All you have to do is have certain media people in your pocket. You start magnifying, or then you can have some kind of troll farm that very easily make a story big, and after that, it can be disinfo laundering. It is called a conspiracy theory laundering. That when it becomes big enough, certain people, whether they are compromised or not, in the mainstream media also pick it up, and then it becomes a national story. So it is for certain that there was a guy called Jeffrey Epstein, and he had the kind of lifestyle that you have heard about. We have heard about. He had the kind of evil things that he was doing, but just because he was doing one or a set of bad things, right, doesn't mean that he is responsible for every evil in the world, right? There are other evil people also, and they might not be connected with him. So I would actually consider it something like a mafioso who is actually running his racket. And any intelligence agency, any person who wants something to do with him, they come, they use him, give him some kind of benefit like money or some kind of blind spot, and then they walk away. And of course, there must be certain people who were sloppy enough to actually want him dead, but they couldn't be very influential. Now, this this attitude of seeing pattern everywhere, right, is called patternicity, and also apophenia, right, where you actually start seeing patterns in everything. And that was a time when so much was happening, right? Media had gone crazy against President Trump. On the other side, you had this QAnon and so much else going. And then all of a sudden, a story that fits into that model appears. And you immediately appropriate it and you start actually putting it in the Gurtan masonry of the story, or superstructure of your conspiracy theory, right? The man was evil. He had big connections. He must have compromising material on people as well. And we are going to actually look at the problem with such material as well, because in 2015-16, we were living in a very different world. Right now, we are in a post-truth society where AI is also present, where people seem to be, believing in what do you call tribalism. So there are people who are actually adhering to their version of the story or their side of the story. Now, here's a spin, and here's a big problem with the whole story. Of course, Trump administration comes to power. They promise they're going to release everything they do, at least according to their own testimony. But you don't find that kind of smoking guns. And all of a sudden, you start thinking, look, it was nothing but that, right? Believe me, if there was any evidence, it would have been burned, destroyed much, much earlier. But the twist that I'm talking about is Elon Musk. Elon Musk comes to power. Power is part of the cabinet, and there he starts Doge. And with Doge, they actually downsize or right-side or rationalize so many parties. And then he has this falling out, very public falling out. And his parting salvo is that Donald Trump is in the files or something of that sort. Now, just look at another logical, application of logic here. Donald Trump is, of course, mentioned. He is not mentioned one time traveling on Lolita Express. Of course, you can say that he was a rich man, so he could fly independently, but forget about that. When he had gone out of power and Ghislaine Maxwell's trial was going on, at that time, there were so many other cases that were built on the man, and he was being prosecuted for so much. But what happens? there's one testimony of a girl called Jane. At least she was a girl in 1990s when this happened, who is actually going for this, who is 14-year-old at that time, and Jane is, actually competing for Miss Teen America. And she actually says that she went with Epstein to Mar-a-Lago and met with Donald Trump, right? But in that testimony, she does not accuse Donald Trump of anything, right? Now, look at the time. At that time, they could have gone crazy with whatever they wanted, with whatever they could find. And here's a genuine victim of Epstein's who went there. And of course, Donald Trump actually owned that franchise, so naturally, you are supposed to talk to somebody of that sort. But she does not accuse Donald Trump of any wrongdoing. So what does it tell you? When is it happening? It is November 30th, 2021 and December the 1st, 2021, right? The first testimony, the second testimony. So if they could find the man, anything on the man, they could have nailed him. They would have nailed him, right? I'm not saying that Donald Trump is an angel, but this habit of ours to think that if somebody we don't agree with has done something wrong, then he has done everything wrong. And then he is the embodiment of evil. That doesn't happen. And Donald Trump, whether you like it or not, might have made a very, very powerful enemies, right? But he is doing what, at least to me, seems to be right for America. For example, all these trade wars. It makes sense. Do you want your country to be perpetually, in trade deficit? No, nobody wants that. Then you have to have this kind of tough love for everybody. And then, of course, he has worked his wonders. He still is doing that. Media, of course, is more compromised in America and elsewhere also. And because other countries' lobbyists also have influence. And by the way, you cannot rule out that Elon Musk might also be representing similar kind of interests. Remember that in 2016, when President Trump was elected, what was his leading slogan? One of the leading slogans: drain the swamp. What is swamp? All these lobbyists and corporate interests that keep on using money to influence policy outcomes. American people want their vote to count, their decision, their opinion to count, have some weight. And here's somebody who's connected directly with the people, who is doing whatever he is doing. At least he never did anything of late, even in 2016, 17, 18 to 20, that he had not promised to the people, right? All of this is part of his platform, his campaign slogans, his promises. So whatever he's doing at least makes sense to me. I don't know whether it makes sense to you. But regardless, even if you don't agree with the man, even if you think that he's evil, do you think that he did this also? Was he part of anything? Record doesn't show anything of the sort. When they were out to get him, when there was so much prosecution going, at that time also, even in testimony like this one, in a high-profile testimony, where they could have just cornered him, they couldn't find anything. So Donald Trump is not included in this. And shame on Elon Musk for saying something so shitty. And I'm sorry, I'm not filtering myself. It is really obnoxious. You don't do this with people's trust when there's so much chaos going on. So what could have happened? Some hostile agency or some so-called quasi-intelligence agency, which had some kind of influence in the media also, found a way to make it a story, Epstein's story, and then magnified it, manipulated it. At least because of that, they had this idea that he will be apprehended and he will be taken into custody. That is what happened. And then at a low level, by the way, you cannot rule out the possibility of suicide, right? Suicides are always messy, complicated, and I haven't seen one suicide where there were not competing theories about somebody's death, right? Why would that be? Because there are people who are emotionally invested. They want to see patternicity, as I pointed out, and they keep on thinking that perhaps something bad happened. So that is one possibility. There's second, and of course that camera thing, that there was 1 minute gap or something of that sort. Just go and check a record whether it was happening in the previous nights also or not. If there was actual, camera or hardware limitation, that happens. We all are in media, so we know that cameras also in live streaming, everything, there's this small gap that emerges, right? Especially when it comes to loops and all. But even if that wasn't the case, loop as in recording loop, not playing a loop, right? But even if that happened, right? If there was something, if he was killed, it could have been very easily some low-level job, and then they actually did whatever is done, complicated the story. Here, let me actually bring in another very important thing. Earlier, I spoke about AI, right? AI, actuaries, people who actually predict the future or work out the future, and then model behavioral modeling, and so much else. Prediction about behavior also. They are softwares and experts which every intelligence agency has. Anybody could have told them that if you carry out such a hit, then it becomes a story and a bigger story, and it won't go away. If you want to create this permanent chasm, this kind of unresolved or unsolvable mystery that keeps on dividing people, then you do it. Otherwise, you won't. Now the question is, why would Mossad, MI6, or CIA do something that actually brings any kind of blame back to them? Right? Doesn't add up. So that is another thing that I wanted to actually talk about. And now let us talk about the content that might be there. Okay, there were people who might be in public eye, who are influential, and who might be pedophiles, right? Or who were doing sexual acts. Do you think that the Overton window for such things is still there? Remember that in the past, there used to be this honor-based issue that somebody is corrupt or somebody has done something wrong sexually, then they are monsters and they are just not going to be actually touched with a barge pole. It doesn't seem to be happening, right? For example, and I just actually bring it up as an example, I don't actually believe that the content in that tape was essentially related to something concrete. But then you have to actually pay some attention to it as well, right? I'm sorry, it's a bit hot, so I'm a bit sweaty. You won't mind that. But regarding this, there used to be times when sexual scandals could have destroyed careers. It doesn't seem to be happening anymore. For example, in 2015-16 campaign, we saw Access Hollywood tape and we heard what was said. And at that time, people thought that, oh, the man is gone, that his career is over. But he actually pulled off one of the biggest surprises of recent history, right? Why would that be? Because voter is getting smarter. They know how to detach people and their functions from the image, right, or whatever scandal there might be. If that doesn't interfere with their operations or their proposed functions, then these issues stop being that influential. Otherwise, there have been so many scandals about people, and then we saw Me Too movement as well. Whatever became of that, right? Remember that there are two kinds of societies, at least. One is honor-based society, where if somebody is said to you, you think that your honor has been compromised, and then you can possibly kill yourself, or then you disappear and are destroyed. The other one is merit-based, a society. What happens there? You keep everything in the silos, right? And that's important. By the way, so from silo also, I also remember that this is also a theory that there were competing silos, and those silos were actually one wanted to preserve, Jeffrey Epstein, and the other silo wanted to take him out. So that might also cause all this confusion. Intelligence agencies might have silos, or various intelligence agencies might have their own character or their own work. But remember that if you want to take somebody that big, and if you want to actually carry out such a kind of thing, whichever whosoever's turf it is, first of all, they have the biggest power, right? CIA would, although CIA is not supposed to operate inside America, but even then, FISA and all that, they might have been aware and they could have stopped because foreign influence happening. This is your turf. And then if there is competing silos and say MI6 wanted him alive and Mossad wanted him dead, whichever is more effective in taking out the person, they win, right? And that did not happen. The whole story seems to be a psyop. I know that there was a criminal called Jeffrey Epstein. I know that he had influence with so many people, and I know that he was a monster, and there were other people who were attached to him, whether they were, for example, that people, Stephen Hawking, I love the man, right? And the guy was totally paralyzed. So the guy who cannot actually, move his finger to scratch his chin, do you think that he was involved in some kind of pedophilia? These important questions need to be answered. But first, you need to have a deep breath, a pause, and you start reflecting on what has happened. And even if, for example, if there is some concern, for example, some foreign agency or some foreign government actually asked that the guy had some kind of intelligence exposure, and kindly don't actually make certain things public, right? Although that is very difficult to communicate with Donald Trump or his administration. But even if that happened, how is that Pam Bondi's fault, right? Remember that once a story has got on, too big. People exploit it, right? And that's how they actually go for information flooding. They go for narrative sabotage. They go for various other manipulations. But if these were psyops, are you doing your elected president any kind of favor by dragging this dead horse, this dead donkey, and then just making a spectacle of yourself? This is important. I think that Donald Trump and his team are doing whatever he promised to his people, and people have shown that he was given the kind of mandate he was given. He has trifecta, for crying out loud. So anybody, and by the way, this goes for Elon Musk also. He might think that his 250 million or whatever might have won Donald Trump some kind of election, but people all over the world and throughout recent 10 years have been claiming that they were the puppet masters and they were the people who actually made Donald Trump. But Donald Trump doesn't roll that way. His most effective weapon are two, right? One, his ability to communicate with everybody, and that's why his Twitter stream, his Truth Social, everything is very important. The second thing is that people think that he's authentic. Whatever he's saying, he means that. And that becomes a problem because in the past you have seen people who are saying one thing and the head is doing this thing, right? And then you don't know what the F is happening, right? At this moment, if somebody wants to sabotage the administration, they are not helping America. And I would have said the same thing about the previous administrations also, because I believe that once somebody is elected, they have the right to serve the people and fulfill their promises. If they could not, like Biden, like Obama, then there's a problem. If they do, then you stand with them, right? And here's one man who is doing whatever he can to make things easier for people. You might agree with it, you might not agree with it. At the start, there were two competing value systems, right? One was this welfare state, social democracy idea, and the other one was this libertarian or perhaps populist economic philosophy. These were the two competing values. One was presented by Kamala Harris, the vice president, and the other one was by President Trump. And people overwhelmingly, I mean, you don't get trifecta that easily. People made a choice. Who are we to actually object to that choice, right? So these are important aspects. Don't allow rich billionaires, influentials, manipulators, the swamp, so to speak, to compromise an administration which is doing what it promised to do. This was my take on the matters. And of course, there can be something wrong with what I've said. You are welcome to actually reach out to me and tell me where I went wrong. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.